Ted Nugent is now arguing that he needs to stop engaging in hateful rhetoric. And he believes that we need to have civilized discourse in this country. Now, keep in mind that Ted Nugent is the same person who held up assault weapons and said that Obama should suck on it. I think that's what he said. I have his exact quote in just a second. But here's what he just recently said about his rhetoric. I have reevaluated my approach. This was during an interview on ABC radio in New York. He also said that he was a street fighter who used certain harsh terms. You weren't a street fighter, dude. Like, you shat on yourself to avoid the draft. You're not a street fighter, you're a clown. But nonetheless, it's interesting that he's coming at this from a softer angle. So I wanna maybe possibly give him some credit. He says, at the tender age of 69, my wife has convinced me that I just can't use those harsh terms. I cannot and I will not. And I encourage even my friends / enemies on the left in the Democrat and liberal world that we have got to be civil to each other. That the whole world is watching America, where you have the God-given right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we have got to be more respectful to the other side. Because I said that I would give you examples of what he said in the past. He has called President Obama a subhuman mongrel and former Secretary of State Hillary Clinton a worthless bitch. During a 2007 performance, Nugent held up what appeared to be 2 machine guns and said that Obama could suck on my machine gun and that Clinton could ride one of these into the sunset. He also drew the attention of the Secret Service back in 2012 when he said he would be dead or in jail by this time next year if Obama got reelected. But now he realizes, or alleges to realize, that he shouldn't speak that way, and he really wants to, switch up the rhetoric.
I think it's interesting that his wife convinced him to change and not his conscience.
Yeah.
That it was after talking to my wife. But you know what's interesting? I love to hear people. I'm from an area where there was a lot of violence, and I love to hear people start changing up, flipping the script when people start getting shot. They're like, oh, I don't want to do that no more.
When one of their own gets shot, right?
When they realize how mortal and how vulnerable and how accessible anybody can be at any moment, then you start thinking, hey, let me stop pushing all this hate, because that could be me on the other end.
Because there are a ton of unhinged individuals out there who could be encouraged by the type of hateful rhetoric that's being spewed. And so, look, I agree with that notion. I think that we need to be more civil with one another, especially those that we disagree with. Things have gotten crazy, especially after this past election. I mean, you see a change of rhetoric among those who were always held to a higher standard. I believe it was Darrell Issa, but I could be wrong. But recently, a reporter approached an elected official and just simply asked a question, and his response was to give her the middle finger, right? Like, that's unacceptable. That's unacceptable. That is not an appropriate way to handle a question from a reporter. It's also not appropriate to assault a reporter, but hey, that'll get you elected, so.
But we're not gonna get to this point of thoughtful civil discourse when one side, not everybody on that side, and I've grown the respect that I have developed for the few Republicans who have been adamant and consistent in their criticism of all that kind of behavior, of a congressman body slamming a reporter, of flipping a reporter off, and are consistently critical of every damn thing that the Trump administration does, because they know that it's not conservative and it's mostly not American. And there's a pretty big list. I follow many of them on Twitter. So where I have to change is that when this administration is over, I hope maybe I will listen to those guys, right? Because I'll think, okay, we disagree, but you guys are not insane, and you stood up when it was clearly difficult to stand up because no one else is standing up. That said, we have millions, tens of millions of Americans who don't operate from the same fact sheet that we do, and it's not up to interpretation. It's a fact sheet. It's a sheet of facts, and they think it's not there, and I think it's there. And until we sort of can get to a point where we can basically agree on, like, climate change is real, and then the argument could be, I don't think we should destroy jobs, it's gonna go too slow, and I think we should take a very cautious, slow approach to it. Okay, but at least we're arguing off the same set of sheets.
At least the conversation starts with an acknowledgement of the facts.
Right. Then we debate how to fix it, and you would want to fix it in a less aggressive way than I and others on the left would want to fix it. But okay, those are conversations. Not that it's made up and China did it to destroy our economy, right? And that's just one example, of course, of thousands. But every day, Trump tells these crazy lies, and I have this weekend, and I kind of recommend it. It won't last forever, but I found through following things on Twitter 2 loopy conservatives to follow, because I thought I want to know.
Only 2?
Right, I want to know every day. These are non-famous people, but they and I'm not even sure they're real people because they got a lot of followers, right? And they have no show, they have no, so I'm curious, and they're like really good looking, right?
Oh, wow.
I know that sounds weird, but I was like, what is this? Is this but anyway, what it gave me every day, because now I'm going through my Twitter feed this morning, I'm like, what is this stuff? I'm like, oh yeah, I followed her yesterday, right? But I'm like,
I knew it was going to be a woman, by the way.
No, that is no question. That's what prompted it, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, why is this person? And I looked, and then I look more, and I'm totally curious. But they don't follow me. But they're like, it's crazy the things that the crazy interpretation of the news, and so many fake stories from websites that I've never heard of, right? Stories that you can tell by the headline aren't true. But I'm curious what they're reading and what they're believing. And first of all, real quick, just the whole world of videos and stories about how Jeff Sessions crushed it in the Intelligence Committee.
Oh yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Crushed it and put an end to any notion of collusion between Trump and Russia.
Yeah.
And we're, but you're like, what? Well, that's at least interpretation, right? That's at least not, I mean, I guess you could think that, but it is super interesting to follow. So there is something to what Ted Nugent says. I'll take the whatever number you set before he says something hateful or awful. I'll take the under.
I think also that this call for diplomacy, because now people started to get hurt, is really interesting. But you can only push the people so far. I think people have reached, you think about Philando, you think about the environment, you think about the economy, you think about people's jobs, you think about healthcare. The people can only take so much. And you need to keep pushing them and pushing them. You want us to be diplomatic? Well, we can't even, our elders are not being cared for. The things that are happening in this country that are unbelievable. And your president is on Twitter. This young girl just came up to me the other day and was like, do you know how many shares in Twitter Trump owns? Because don't you think it's interesting that everything he goes to Twitter for, don't you think he owns, and I'm thinking, I said, when I talk to the young Turks, I'm going to tell them to get on this, because I think it's really interesting that he always takes everything to Twitter. You have presidents and politicians doing Twitter beef like rappers in the 90s. Like, it's gotten to a point. We're like the Lord of the Flies.
Right, and even that I feel like is up for interpretation, because some people think, oh, he's more accessible because he's on Twitter, so there's more transparency. But no. He uses Twitter, in my opinion, as a way of escaping any real,
that's right.
Elaborating on his policies, actually talking to the American people in a detailed way. 140 characters of nonsense, anyone can do that, right? And so I feel like that's his way of escaping any real responsibility that he has as a president.
It's a way to speak to his base unfiltered immediately.
Yeah.
So it is effective. It's very effective for him.
And they believe him.
Right, and they believe him, as evidenced by this little new trick I've got that I'm sure a zillion other people came up with first. But it's tough to read, man. It is it's tough. But as long as we got 99% of the people are earning none of the money, and as long as those, and I'm using that as a symbol of the economic disparity. But as long as that continues to happen, as long as we continue to be a country where the have and have-nots division is glaring. Like, we've had it before, we've always had it. We'll accept some of it, like, we get it. This is America. Some people are gonna do a lot better than other people. And I don't think reasonable Americans, nobody wants to stop rich people from being rich, right? But we crossed some dangerous point. And that frustration that we saw in Washington, and that's obviously a crazy person, just like it was with Gabby Giffords, but when we've reached, that anger is real. We saw it in November, and the idea that we can hug it out is a gigantic, gigantic mistake.
You don't like ads? I hear you, brother. You know how you can avoid ads for the Young Turks? Become a Young Turks member and get all the content ad-free. tytnetwork.com/join.